Okay, today I'd like to talk about Aeschylus' Oresteia, and specifically I'd like to talk about it not so much in its literary aspect, but as a sort of historical document which gives us some understanding of what Golden Age Greece was like. And this is the century after pre-Socratic physics emerges. And the connection between art and science and religion and politics and ethics and law and custom, tradition, as well as rational criticism. So there's a lot going on in this trilogy, this set of three tragedies written by Aeschylus, entered into the competition in 458. And Aeschylus has always been regarded as the most elevated and, how can I put it, idealizing of the Greek tragic writers. I mean, there were plenty more besides the three that we have, but among the three superior examples that we have, Aeschylus is the most elevated in tone and in topic and in matter. Now, for the Athenians, there was an overlap, a considerable convergence of religion, art, and politics. And the reason why is that religion was not separable from politics. Political life and the state derived its legitimacy from a political understanding of the world, or a religious understanding of the world, which is why religious skepticism was treated as a kind of sedition. Because if you don't believe in the gods of the state or the gods that have been traditionally handed down, you're also denying the legitimacy of the government. And this is a tradition that lasts for a very long time. It's a big part of the problem that the Romans had with the Christians, right? Denying Roman religion is the same thing, or amounts to denying the legitimacy of the Roman state. The Romans regarded this as seditious, and within their framework, that's what it was. But to come back to Aeschylus, the Oresteia is the only example we have of a full set of three tragedies, because they were entered into this festival, the festival to Dionysus, which was held every spring, and then they would choose three contestants, the three best writers and their three best tragedies, and then they added to each of their set of three tragedies something called a satyr play, which was apparently a kind of bawdy and burlesque sort of comedy. Remember, the word tragedy comes from the Greek tragodia, goat song, and the goat is a symbol of sexuality, fertility, lust, and they're singing the goat song. They're singing songs about human passion, but not just human passion. They're also singing a song or creating a poem about human aspiration and also human limitation. In every case, tragic heroes cause some difficulty for themselves, and they have to realize before paying for their mistake with their death that they did it to themselves. So it's the most capable and most heroic that have a tendency to outsmart themselves. Those that heroically push the envelope sooner or later are going to break the envelope, and when the envelope tears, it'll be too late. You'll be outside the envelope and there'll be no way to fix it. So you might say the tragedy is about irrevocable mistakes, mistakes that nobody can fix. Consider, for example, Oedipus. He killed his father, he had sex with his mother, he became king of Thebes and started a family. So he has a number of children who are also his half-brothers and sisters. When he finds out, and when Jocasta finds out who and what they are, Jocasta kills herself, and then Oedipus gouges his own eyes out. All right, which is not quite death, but we're certainly moving in that direction. And by the time we finish the Oedipus saga, we will find him buried in some secret grove in Athens, redeemed in some way by his suffering, made holy by his suffering. Problem with Oedipus is that even if we have the best intentions in the world, there's nothing we can do to fix your problem. Your dad is dead, and you killed him, and there's nothing we can do about that. Your mom is your wife, and you have several children. There's nothing we can do about that that isn't going to make it worse. I mean, you wouldn't want to kill the children. You wouldn't want to kill your mother and wife. So you're stuck with this, and your life is permanently messed up. There's nothing anybody can do for it. So tragedy individuates. It's about particular people and the particular kind of mistakes that they make and the sort of labyrinth that they create for themselves. They never get out of it. Characteristically, tragedy ends in death. Not always, but almost always. Think of Shakespearean tragedy, right? You get a big mound of corpses at the end of Hamlet, the end of King Lear, at the end of Romeo and Juliet, or at the end of Othello. So, yeah, you have to have a whole bunch of dead people when you finish a tragedy. That's what contrasts tragedy with comedy. Comedy, unlike tragedy, ends in marriage rather than death. Comedy is about the first half of human life. And it's about the mistakes that we make that can be fixed. In other words, comedy is about revocable errors. You can make a mistake in a comedy, but before the end of the comedy, when everybody has to get married, you have to resolve the mistake and find out that you're really long-lost, separated twins who didn't recognize each other initially and thought and did a lot of cross-dressing, but now you understand who you are and we're all going to get married and live happily ever after. So, comedy ends in life, tragedy ends in death. And one is about the first half of human life, the other is about the second. One is about mistakes that we make that can be fixed. The other is about the terrible class of mistakes that we make that can't be fixed. It's a kind of standing warning that the price of heroism may well be self-destruction. And by the time you've realized that you've gone too far, it's too late. That's something that just about every tragic hero has in common. Now, another thing that tragedies have in common is grossly dysfunctional families. I mean, however messed up your family life may be, it's not as bad as the families that get to be immortalized in Greek tragedy. In this case, the line which leads to Agamemnon and Menelaus goes all the way back to Father Zeus and Pelops and Tantalus, and much of their family interactions involve cannibalism, where, as a way of getting back at and revenge of one brother to another, he kills his children and feeds them to him. There's various references to fratricide, matricide, patricide. Everybody's getting killed, and much of this murder is within the family. There's a good bit of cannibalism, some incest, some adultery of one brother with another brother's wife. In other words, in every way that a family can be messed up, the families in Greek tragedy are. All right, so they're kind of standing examples of heroically enlarged dysfunction. Another thing that's worth noting about tragedy is that, unlike epic, we're finally going to get some interesting female characters. Back when we were in the age of epic, which is an age of oral literature, women were mostly used as counters, which indicated the status of the hero that owned them or that had captured them, something like that. A good example is the fact that Agamemnon is bringing home his concubine, Cassandra, and on the assumption that his wife isn't going to mind. So, we get interesting female characters, and most of them are monstrously crazy. We get people like Medea, or people in this case like Clytemnestra. She is understandably enraged, but it is strange because it seems It's an inversion in the understanding of activity, particularly vengeance, because it is found in the hands of a woman. The description of Clytemnestra and her lover, who's also her cousin, Aegisthus, reverses the sexual dynamics. She is clearly the initiator. She is clearly the leader. She is clearly the ruler. He's an acolyte. He's a bit player. And the inversion of political order and sexual gradation and moral understanding is a constant theme here, and it becomes overburdened with a sense of uncanny strangeness. Things have not just shifted, they've inverted. Now, Clytemnestra is a fascinating creature because she has, even though in a feminine body, the rage of Achilles. In other words, if she were capable, she certainly would have killed her husband and his concubine as soon as they stepped off the boat and had her revenge that way. But she knows that she's not capable of that. So in a world in which muscle still determines what your military options are, she uses superior guile to persuade Agamemnon onto the red carpet. Now, the red carpet treatment is meant to indicate how much Agamemnon has changed in the 10 years he's been gone at Troy. This is the kind of honor that would be unusual and atypical of Greece. It would have been much more like the honor of Persians, of later, of Oriental Asian empires like the Persian. In other words, this would have been seen as Oriental luxury, Asian influence on his culture. So he pretends that he doesn't want it, but he really does because he's arrogant and stupid, as he's proved so many times in the course of the Iliad. He is not aware of the kind of reaction he ignites in Clytemnestra. But of course, Cassandra, the prophetess who's doomed never to be believed, well, it turns out that she knows what's going to happen, but no one will listen to her. And Agamemnon, who's in charge, he doesn't know what's going to happen. So he allows himself to be led in on the red carpet, which very tastefully doesn't show the blood. And when he gets into his bath, he's stabbed to death by Clytemnestra. Thereafter, she hunts down Cassandra and she kills her too, even though actually Cassandra hasn't done anything. She just happens to be there. She's sort of collateral damage. I mean, she didn't ask to have her city destroyed and be turned into a slave by Agamemnon, but tragedy is not about justice, right? It's about, or at least it's not usually about justice, except in a very primitive sense of the kind of blood vendetta that can go on for generations and show no signs of ending. So what we have is the ethos of blood vendetta, retaliation. Now, before Agamemnon went to Troy, he didn't have favorable winds, so he sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia. Now, he didn't ask Clytemnestra if that was okay with her, and it's easy to believe that his decision to kill his daughter in order to obtain favorable winds would not be received well by anybody in his family, particularly his wife. But off he goes on an adventure to Troy for 10 years. He comes back, and she is already engaged in an adulterous affair. She has already usurped his position in the family and in the state, and she is going to now murder her husband, murder his concubine, and insist that she is justified in this, and justified in usurping the position because of Agamemnon's conduct. Okay, now they have a son, Orestes. Orestes knows, because of the tradition of blood vendetta, that he has an obligation to kill whoever killed his father, which turns out to be his mother, which you can see would be awkward. This is going to make the second play, The Libation Bearers, a little bit more talky than the kind of quicker action that we see in the Agamemnon. And there's some argument, because it is a kind of a tricky question, whether you are supposed to engage in blood vendetta within your own family. And if you are, which members of your family are subject to that and under what circumstances? Now, in the outlook that Orestes and Agamemnon both share, someone kills a member of your family or dishonors them, you have to respond in kind. Retaliation is obligatory. Now, when Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon, she believes she has some justification, but whether she has justification or not, it's clear that there is a justification for Orestes revenging his father by killing his own mother. The difficulty is, of course, is that if blood pollution because your father was killed by your mother is interfering with the moral or spiritual life of the city, having a son kill his mother, it's hard to see how that's going to set things straight. If killing your spouse is bad, killing your parent, particularly your mother, has to be a particularly egregious transgression. In other words, this is a question of what do we do when we have conflicting obligations and no guidepost, nothing external to our feelings to figure out what we're supposed to do. Well, you wouldn't have a good tragedy unless he decided to kill his mother anyway, which he does. So Orestes kills Clytemnestra. She, of course, is quite operatic in her exit. And then the Furies, the image of bloodlust and blood retaliation, emerge and they chase after Orestes, intending to torture him, to torment him, to retaliate, because there's no one who can take the place and retaliate on behalf of Clytemnestra. The problem with this is that it's an endless cycle of bloodletting, and retaliation often just doesn't make sense, or there are constraints upon it which are very hard to negotiate. And even when in questions of murder, there are some cases that are hard to judge. So what they do in the third play, the Eumenides, is they flee to Athens. Orestes goes with the Furies close behind him, these primitive goddesses of retribution. And they come to Athena's city. Now, Athena is observing this, and Athena is the patron city of Athens, patron goddess of Athens. It's Athens' city, and she's the goddess of wisdom. Athena says when the Furies chase Orestes to Athens, she stops the Furies and says, "We are not going to have a direct assault by the Furies. We have a new idea here in Athens, a new way of handling this problem. And we're going to use it, and we're going to invest it with religious valence, with religious power, with religious significance, using the medium of art." So this third tragedy, the Eumenides, which means the kindly ones, is going to turn the ferocious spirits of revenge, the Furies, into the kindly ones. They're going to be part of our new political and moral and legal regime. The desire for revenge will always be there, but it's going to be tamed and organized and restrained by reason. So what happens when they get to Athens is that they have a trial, and Orestes is prosecuted for murder. Now, here's the new idea. This is called the rule of law. If you think of pre-Socratic physics as physics 2.0, remember that I told you that every scientific revolution always creates a transformation in the other domains of culture, particularly the humanities. This is a prime example of that. The third tragedy in the series, the Eumenides, does not end in death. Orestes does not get convicted and does not get executed. the vengeance demanded by the Furies is thwarted. And the reason why is this. There are some circumstances that are hard cases to judge. This is one of the reasons why law turns out to be important. All right? Not every case falls so clearly under one conception or another. All right? So was killing Clytemnestra unjustifiable, foul matricide, or was it the all too justifiable murder or killing of the wretch that murdered his father? Well, the problem is both are true. And within the confines of the tradition of blood vendetta, there's no one right answer. I mean, you could do either. Orestes could have done either, and also the Furies don't have to treat him as if he were exclusively a matricide. Now, what happens is that this is a very close case. They get 12 Athenian jurors, and 6 think that Orestes is guilty, 6 think that he's innocent. So Athena breaks the tie and says, you are acquitted of matricide, or this is something like justifiable homicide. And for that reason, you are not going to be killed, but the Furies are going to stay with us and become part of our new regime, our rule of law. Do you see how the rule of law is to blood vendetta what Homeric poetry is to pre-Socratic physics? In other words, it's a new, non-mythological, non-traditional way of accounting for the world. They've invented a new rational account of their new idea, the rule of law, which is a really sophisticated one. And the idea is that everyone is going to be held to account to the same external objective standard. And justice will require that you refrain from immediate blood vendetta and let the law take its course. Why? Well, because people are not good judges of their own cases. And so this is going to give you an objective standard of justice. This is politics or law 2.0. It's the intellectual analog of the physics 2.0 we got from Thales and his subsequent thinkers. Every time you have a scientific revolution, you have to generate a revolution in all the other domains of culture. All right, let's bracket that for now. My big point is this. Art and religion, the myths that they formulate, are cognitive. They're telling you something about the world. They are justifying and creating a vocabulary of images and stories with which people are going to legitimate their new political and legal regime. So in the future, if anybody wonders why we have laws and a jury, the answer will be is that Athena really liked that idea. And you should have a look at Aeschylus's play. Remember that tragedy, unlike epic, is the characteristic literary activity of a culture that is literate. Whereas the earlier tradition of epic at least starts out and spends most of its life as an oral tradition. Now I want to move from Aeschylus to Plato. Let's look at Republic Book 2. And what I want to talk about here is the development of the Platonic drama. This is a transformation of Greek comedy and tragedy. Greek comedy and tragedy are to the senses what Platonic dialogue is to the mind. That's the reason why you can't perform Platonic dialogues. They're written in such a way as they cannot be performed, because they are not meant to be spectacles, not objects of your observation. Instead, they're supposed to be objects of your cognition. And so Platonic drama is to tragedy and comedy as mind is to body. Okay, so Plato is going to be writing epic and comedy and tragedy and lyric But here, we're starting out on a sort of journey. We have come down to Piraeus. Socrates has been captured, forced to talk, and fought his way out of a conflict with Thrasymachus. And tellingly, instead of defeating Thrasymachus, he humiliated and disgraced Thrasymachus, because Thrasymachus is looking to make a name for himself so that he can sell his services to wealthy aristocratic young Athenians, and he will teach them that justice is the advantage of the stronger, and he expects to be recognized for his wisdom with wealth. The difference between Socrates and a sophist is that a sophist teaches you for his benefit. Socrates teaches you for your benefit, which is why he never charges a fee. So Socrates silences Thrasymachus using arguments that he knows are second and third rate. What he's trying to do is quiet Thrasymachus down, at the same time taunt Adeimantus and Glaucon into extending the argument. Now, unlike the interlocutors in the first book, Thrasymachus, Polemarchus, and Cephalus, although three of those are not citizens of Athens, Socrates is a citizen, and now we're going to move to it in book 2 to a discussion between the citizens of Athens. Polemarchus and Adeimantus are Plato's brothers. They are aristocratic, they are wealthy, they are well educated. And this is the proper audience for Socrates' discussion. If you're going to discuss justice and politics, it is imperative that you make sure that the people you're discussing it with are relevant to the issue. And that's why you need citizens, and why there's a greater focus and energy and precision in the discussion that we're going to have among citizens starting in book 2. Okay, now Glaucon and Adeimantus step in, and Glaucon, who's most brave in all things, says, Socrates, look, I'm not satisfied with your argument. It's not that I believe that you're wrong. Oh no, I'm completely in agreement with you, but I've heard certain people say that the problem with justice is that it's not pleasant, and it may be good because it gets you a good reputation. So the reputation for justice may be good, but doing justice is no fun. It'd be easier to do injustice and more pleasant, and a better thing if you could get away with it. So what Glaucon says is, let's imagine someone who's perfectly unjust, and let's imagine another man who is perfectly just. And let all the good things in life, pleasure and power and sex and money and whatever else you can think of, let's have our unjust man get all of that he wants. And then let's have the just man be mistaken and thought unjust, so that his eyes get put out and he gets burned and chopped up and all kinds of really awful, gruesome things happen to him. Now, Glaucon says, Socrates, what we need to know is a good explanation for why the just man is better off even when wretchedly punished and is immiserated and harmed, and the unjust man who's having a ball as the emperor of Persia, why he's worse off. Now, you have to understand the irony here, all right? Glaucon and Adeimantus are gentlemen, and they have heard the sophistic encomia, which is a speech of praise, for power over justice, and arguments that the sophists have made that justice is weak and justice is harmful. It's a kind of naive innocence. Well, Thrasymachus has been hoping to sell his services, but he got beaten by Socrates. Now, the boys that have stepped in, Glaucon and Adeimantus, they want to know, show us that justice is good in and of itself, not at all for the things that it gets you. right? Instead, let all the things that it gets you go the other way, flip them, and then show us that justice by itself is good. They point out that there are three kinds of good things. There are things that are good in and of themselves. That would be something like health. There are things that are good because of what they get you. That would be things like work, right? If you want to eat, then you have to go to work and earn your living. So some people, at least some of the time, don't like the work that they're doing, but they do it because they like what it gets them. Something like gymnastic exercise might well be the same. People may not enjoy sweating and working hard, but they may like the health that it brings them. And finally, there's a third kind of thing that's good in and of itself and also good for what it gets you. And what Glaucon and Adeimantus are doing is trying to get Socrates to show that justice is good in and of itself, independent of what it gets you. And even if injustice were to get you everything else you might desire, you would be wretched and unhappy without justice. Now you have to understand the irony here. The boys, Glaucon and Adeimantus, are half persuaded by this. They don't know a good argument against it, but they're gentlemen, so they don't want to sign on to anything as crass and as vicious and as plebeian as the pure predator parasitism that Thrasymachus is offering. Right? Justice is the advantage of the stronger. What the two boys, the brothers, insist on is show us, Socrates, that justice by itself is good and that it's good in and of itself, regardless of what it gets you. Okay. Now, Socrates, very ironically, it's very funny, he says, you boys, polish this up like it were, as if it were a statue, and I'll tell you, you put a real nice gloss on it. One could easily mistake what the eloquence with which you articulate this for the fact that you believe it. And of course, what it means there, of course, is that Socrates sees right through this. He understands that the boys are still under the spell of sophists like Thrasymachus, even if Thrasymachus has been shown up and humiliated. And so now the real job of the Republic begins. The Republic is a battle, a kind of Homeric one-on-one, like we see, say, between Achilles and Hector. It's a one-on-one, but they're not fighting for a city. They're fighting for the position of educator to the youth of Athens. And he's stopped Thrasymachus, and now he's being challenged by Glaucon and Adeimantus to show that all of the sophists are wrong and that justice is the most valuable thing for the human soul and for society. Now, here's where Plato begins one of his, it's an analogy that's central to the Republic, but it never really gets argued for. You just take it as it is. The city is like the man. And it's not so far-fetched. It means that the microcosm and the macrocosm have a certain isomorphic homology. Fair enough. And he says, if we're going to look inside the soul and the mental state of a human being, we might be well advised, to look at the state of human societies because they will reflect on a larger scale, a macroscopic scale, as he puts it, easier to see, if we talk about human societies. So he's going to talk about collective individuals and whether their souls are properly organized, which means whether their elements are properly organized, and where we will find justice among those possible organizations. So Socrates says, if we were going to create a city in speech, we would have to start with the most primitive of cities. It would be something actually really not much like a city, more like a village, a hamlet. It's the city of utmost necessity. It turns out that human beings are social animals, which is why they're found in families, not as in isolated, atomized individuals. Right? We'll get that when we get to the Enlightenment. But these families, even by themselves, are not very satisfactory in their subsistence, and there is a natural tendency for families to congregate together and then to exchange on the basis of the division of labor. So the minimal necessities of human beings will be produced by specific craftsmen. There'll be farmers to produce grain and the other things that come from the land, but there'll also be weavers and shoemakers and bakers and other kinds of craftsmen. But there won't be any crafts producing things that are superfluous or luxurious. Everybody will get pretty much the things that they need. So it'll be a very rough and perhaps rustic community. But it'll be healthy in the sense that they'll be living a natural life, meeting the necessities of human desire, like the desire for food. And they can be a sustaining social unit, or an ongoing social unit. But the difficulty is that there's something in people which drives them, and this could be thought of as connected to the idea of hubris, which drives them beyond what is necessary towards what is superfluous, towards culture in a way, right? Culture involves luxury, it involves free time, it involves connoisseurship, it involves a great deal of social complexity that you're not going to find in the city of utmost necessity. And this will be a city not of people with well-regulated desires. This will be a swinish city directed towards satisfying the various other desires people have. So there will be alcohol and symposia where people get drunk, a drinking party. There will be prostitution and theft, and there'll be a need for doctors because the bad lives will cause a great many needless diseases. So we move from the city of utmost necessity to a city of luxury, which is a feverish city. And that's the city that all civilized peoples live in. In other words, that's Athens, but it's also any other city that you could name in the Med or anywhere else. Okay. He also points out that there's a need for guardians. You can't have a city without a distinction between the rulers and the ruled. And the rulers can only rule on the basis of their excellence, not on the basis of their violence. Violence will be subsidiary, not primary. So, unlike the tradition of the Homeric epic, violence and conquest are not the source of right. They're not the source of political order. What we need is a new kind of ruler and a new kind of order that subordinates violence to knowledge. And this will offer us a possibility to create a new political science, a new ethics, a new politics, a new law, a new aesthetics, which is now intellectually respectable in the new intellectual contexts that have been created by the development of pre-Socratic physics a century before, or 2 centuries before, because Plato was writing this. So, Plato begins to talk about the structure of society, and we hearken back to an image that we got from Thrasymachus of shepherds, sheep, and dogs. Shepherds, in Plato's view, serve the interests of their flock, and they take care of them because that's what a shepherd's job actually is, properly speaking. Thrasymachus believes the shepherd is a pure predator parasite who has the sheep only for his own benefit. And Socrates thwarts that argument, but Plato's going to hearken back to it. He's going to say what we're going to need is someone that relates to the ordinary people making up society in the way that a human shepherd relates to a bunch of quadrupeds. So in other words, Plato's Republic, like every other book of Greek philosophy or Greek political philosophy, and also as Roman philosophy as well, is explicitly inegalitarian. Plato does not believe in human equality. Neither did Aristotle, neither did anybody else among the ancient Greeks. The Romans didn't believe in equality either, except in a very attenuated sense that you get with some of the Romans, some of the Stoics, that potentially, since everybody's has the potential to be rational and perfectly rational, they have the potential to be perfectly stoical. But alas, in the real world, almost nobody does. But apart from that, inequality is the emphasis of Greek and Roman culture. Consider the fact that the Greeks are the ones who invent the Olympic Games. That's not about everybody throwing the discus the same distance. That's about seeing who throws it the furthest. That's what their archery and their javelin throw and all the other Olympic competition is about. It's about who's the best. Where the source of human equality is not Athens, it's Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, monotheism, is going to introduce the idea of human equality. It doesn't exist among the Greeks or the Romans. That's going to be one of the big transformations that happens when there's a kind of braiding together of Athens and Jerusalem. So, Plato wants the shepherds to be good shepherds. They take care of society, and they do it out of moral obligation, because knowledge carries with it its own moral necessities. And Plato is going to subordinate everything, politics, ethics, law, but also things like physics and also things like aesthetics to ethics. So in other words, he's going to bring moral judgment to bear on art. And he's going to say no matter how powerful and moving a piece of art is, if it gets its listeners to behave badly, it has to be censored because then it's bad art. This is essentially the argument we make when we don't allow children access to pornography. Or think of it differently. One of the most platonic things in our culture is Sesame Street. What do we show little kids in Sesame Street? Numbers, colors, letters, the days of the week. Caring means sharing, be nice to people. But we never show them, say, how to load a handgun. Or we never show them the pleasures of narcotics addiction. And the reason why we don't give them access to that is because we think it has a bad influence on kids. Plato was the first person to figure that out and make an argument about it. And it's a very important argument, as we're going to see when we get to book 3. But the point is this. Much of Greek tragedy and much of Greek myth is really messed up. I mean, think of Medea, who chops her brother to bits to make her escape with Jason, and then she persuades some 7 daughters to cut up her uncle, and they stew him, and then it turns out she can't resurrect him, so they've all killed their father, and then later on she's going to kill her own children just to get back at her husband. This is not fun for the whole family, but the Greeks thought it was. Not just Medea. Think of something like, Aeschylus' Oresteia would be a good example. Clytemnestra kills her husband. Her son kills her. The Furies chase Orestes. Father murder, mother murder, murders within the family, incest, rape, adultery, the whole 9 yards of aberrant soap opera behavior is found in an intensified form in Greek tragedy and in Greek myths. Cannibalism, feeding children to their parents, stuff like that is distressingly popular. And Plato says, if you raise kids on twisted stuff like that, what you're going to end up with is twisted adults. And Plato says, look, what that means is that we're going to have to be very careful about education, because education is going to be the ultimate political issue. Nothing is more important, and Plato's right about that. It's still a fact about politics. The single most important issue in the long term is always the education of young people. Everything else can be recouped. This is one you can't drop. And then we get to the end of the second book, and Plato's going to introduce the myth of the metals. He says, look, this is a noble lie. So his city is built upon a lie, upon a myth. But it's a myth that tells the truth. It gets people that don't understand what's going on to behave as if they did. They'll have true opinion rather than knowledge. So they'll be told that some of them were born with bronze, some with silver, some with gold in their souls. And that constitutes separate strata of society. The bronze are the workers and the farmers, craftsmen. The silver are the auxiliaries, who are essentially the police department. They're the army enforcement unit. And the gold class is the class of philosophers, who are studying the nature of ultimate reality. And because of their superior knowledge, they are able to guide the state in the best interests of the bronze and the silver and themselves. Now, the key thing here, and I'm going to leave you with this, the silver people are good at war, they're very courageous, and they have what's called tumos, which is spiritedness. And what they are is Homeric heroes who have been demoted a notch, because the problem with Homeric heroes is that they were really good at fighting and destroying things, but they were not guided by wisdom, and many of the decisions they made were catastrophic and self-destructive. So what Plato is doing here is demoting the Homeric hero a notch and putting him in the service of a new kind of hero, a hero of knowledge rather than violence, a hero of mind rather than body. The body heroes are going to be our silver auxiliaries who enforce the decisions of the philosophers. And the philosophers are going to be ascetics, which means that they are going to live on a pure subsistence wage. They're not allowed to own anything. They're not allowed to touch gold and silver. And what that means is this will be, as Marx would say, the theoretical minimum for the extraction of surplus value. In other words, because everything gets produced by the workers, and the guardians, the gold, only take food and clothing and whatever it is they need, but they don't have any possessions. All of what's left over goes back to the producers. So in other words, this is the absolute minimum of economic exploitation. So Plato's gold class is going to be a quasi-hereditary priesthood, and there'll be a priesthood of ascetics, and it'll be very, very stable, because whatever regime change might happen, the new rulers are going to take more than the absolute minimum that's being taken by the Platonic guardians. So there's no reason for the bronze or the silver to try and usurp their position, because under any other regime, they're going to get less. So Plato is going to leave us now with the myth of the metals, which he calls a noble lie. What that means is that Plato doesn't believe that everyone has equal access to truth and understanding. And that's a plausible enough idea. It depends on what you do with it. On the other hand, Plato wants to make sure that the rulers do not become arrogant and avaricious. And he's going to ensure that by not allowing them to own anything at all. And this is a set of extremely radical ideas. And we'll have to investigate further to figure out what makes a lie noble, or are lies ever noble. And maybe we'll make reference back to that Jack Nicholson movie where he says, "You can't handle the truth." I don't know if that's a damning admission or not. But as we move on now to Book 3, we're going to get the attack on Homer, and we'll find out what Platonic aesthetics and aesthetics in the service of ethics is going to look like. Bye-bye.